Good afternoon. It's Netta Feinstein. Last presentation, I said the month was Adar, but it's actually the Hebrew month is ER. So today is the 22nd of the day of ER, and the English calendar is the 24th of April. So going forward, I opened the meeting, like I said, the morning meeting with our kind of our purpose and the objectives, why we're here. And our purpose is to come closer to God, bring God closer to the world, into the world, and more revelation, like the times of the Messiah, the revelation. And again, the Jews and Noahides are in partnership with that. This is the relationship which I like to discuss. And so we'll start with that after the initial goals and objectives. So the goal was to bring closer God to this world, the revelation. And some of the things which are helpful for doing that is to know that we have to know our relationship with God and relationship to the world, and uh, and to keep in mind a few um, points. One is Ein od milvado. There's nothing outside of God. God is everywhere. God is everything. Yet we are permitted to, or are encouraged even to, or commanded to act as independent entities. And God is created to the point where it's very difficult by normal use of our senses to recognize and see God or know God. And with that in mind, um, almost anything I present, you can find a different view. In this world, we like to find absolutes, like we call Claude Godol's universally accepted concepts, which are there all the time and are evident all the time. And when we get closer to talking about God and godliness in Judaism, we see a lot of variances. And it's not like that God can't make up his mind. Um, at the time of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, many things are very straightforward. But again, there was anticipation that situations occur where you have to adjust the law. So if you hear me say something, I might say, but there's another view on that. And you'll find even in the Talmud, um, all sorts of arguments. And it's not whether the law is valid or not, that what God gave to Moses and Mount Sinai, is how to apply it in certain situations. And it's a vast subject. I remember one person who was getting newly introduced to Judaism, and he said, "How can I believe this? Because you guys argue about everything, even in the Talmud." But the Talmud argument is for clarifications and adaptations to new technology and the situation and the geography. So don't let that stop you. But closer you come to God, then you will then find the more absolute um, values and absolute concepts. So going forward with that Jewish law allows for um, going beyond the books. As a matter of fact, it's required. I was once looking for some information on a Noahide, and I couldn't find the answer in the law book, the law books that we had. Not that I'm proficient in all Jewish law, I was trying to find out what deals with that, and I subsequently took that, set it aside. But the rabbi said that if you have it all in the books, then you've contained God, and God's wisdom is infinite. So therefore, we learn as much as we can, and then we go to our rabbis or rabbinical leaders, Torah scholars who know more than we do on the whole, and when it even comes down, even go further, that we go to certain special leaders, and it's said that God gives the ability to decipher a situation that's not in the books, and sort of like a power given to the leaders to be able to do that. And again, it's not a crutch or not, you can't find an answer. It's that we realize it's God's wisdom is infinite. And there are many situations where are described in Jewish law, which are likely not even to occur. But nevertheless, we learn it because it's God's wisdom. And of course, you never know. Uh, give an example is that I might have mentioned there's laws about a rebellious son written in the Torah and how you deal with him. And ultimately, if he doesn't change, is very, very strict, to say the least. And I saw writing from a person who was somewhat versed in Jewish law, and they said, "How can I believe in something that's so hard on the children? It's so difficult and brutal, it seems." And you find later in the Talmudic discussions of the law, that all the specifics and requirements for the law to go into effect are nearly impossible to fulfill, and it's doubtful that the law was even ever carried out. So again, we're learning how to deal with the world. We're also learning to appreciate God's wisdom. So secondly, the point is that nothing occurs without God, and Kol b'yedei Shemayim. And the third thing is that we are giving the ability to make a difference in the world. And this could be demonstrated. Again, I use a scientific example, which again won't be the ultimate, because sooner or later some will say, "Yeah, but what about this situation?" But it gives you what we call a muscle, an example we can relate to. And one of the sciences said that there's one level of matter, though you can predict, you know, occurrences, motion, momentum, acceleration, direction, but in another manner that we can't. That it's random, or you have to go by percentages, and that even with that, it can be influenced by human intervention of some type. So again, we're given the power to make a difference in the world, not just for our own lives, but for the betterment of the world. And that's to the Jews and to the Noahides. And we both, again, are under the umbrella of Judaism. So going forward, I mentioned that, as I said, my profession was a registered nurse. I do dabble at it a bit, but so I call it Hasidic Nurses Notes. And I made a training pamphlet for the university and to help orient people who are not Jewish uh, in hospitals to some of our customs. I mentioned this before. So I'll be able to expound upon a couple of concepts from some of the template ideas that are in this pamphlet. So one big idea, which I often touch upon, is the relationship between the Noahide and the Jews. And we often find that getting support from Jewish institutions and Jews themselves, many are not really aware too much about the Noahide or know much about it at all, and can incorporate it. So therefore, how do we bridge the gap? I mean, how much do we bridge the gap? We're not meant to be one person. When there's conversions available if someone wants it, but it's two separate nations with similar goals, maybe some different objectives. So if you're working in healthcare, or again, I think in almost any other area, since many of you are very well versed in biblical literature, you've done it on your own, or you went to classes, reading, and you run into some Jewish people and you don't know them too well, and you want to bridge the gap. I would say that the last thing you should use is to start to have a biblical or Torah related discussion. Because of our background, there's been missionaries throughout the ages, And as you know, in contrast, that we don't try to have people convert to Judaism. You can do it, but it's not like one of our frontline uh, objectives. If you can even call it objectives, it can be done, and it's appropriate at times if a person pushes for it, and the rabbis feel he's suited for it. And that makes Judaism quite different than almost any other, we say, so-called religion in the world, which makes should stand up and take notice to that. That we spend a lot of time actually striving to keep our own in the fold. And sometimes I think other people are more interested in getting the Jews in their fold than to take care of their own. So this, I think, is a strong point when we talk about Judaism. So how do you get close? Well, again, I mentioned this Pirkei Avos, and there's one of the missions that says, um, the more you try to get honor, the more you lose it. Or the converse is, he who honors others, himself honored. So if you're trying to make that inroad, especially on an intellectual basis, that it really is not going to be fruitful, most likely, or minimally. The best thing to do is, again, stand back. Don't try to intercede on anybody's behalf without checking with them first, if at all possible. And I mentioned this again with food, kosher food. As much as you may be well read, kosher foods, kosher inspection symbols, that that's only the beginning of what a person whose person will is. Again, some are more liberal, and some will accept things that others won't. But to stand back and say, is it something I can get for you? Whether it be in a store and say, I'm going to get this for him, he'll like it, and I know these signs. So again, stand back a little bit, test the waters, do a little market research, and then you can go forward if the person wants you to do so. There's some other items where if you're aware of them and you help a Jewish person with them, and this is going to really start to develop a bond. It brings me to something I was studying recently, and it's to know the difference between kindness and use the word mercy. And mercy sounds a little drastic, but we have a chain of conduct, and part of it is kindness, and then withholding of kindness, and then mercy. So kindness is kind of clear. Well, kindness actually, the definition we use in the strictest sense is giving because the person who's giving is a giver, and he likes to give and he wants to give, and he doesn't spend necessarily too much time to find out the person to whom he's giving is really needs it. And he may well in fact need it, but it's not necessarily a full criteria. He he gets gratification out of helping others. And we see, I mean, I've seen in all my years working in healthcare and other, let's say, social services, the many givers really probably, you can say they get as much out, if not more, than the receivers, to the point where they may be too pushy with the giving, or they may not, they maybe need to give the giving somewhere else where it's really needed. Then you have the withholding of kindness, we'll say, which is not necessarily meanness. It's like giving a child at a certain point, not jumping every time he cries. He wants something. Teaching him how to get this classic is go to the toilet on his own rather than always having a diaper for the rest of his life, God forbid. So there's sometimes a withholding of kindness, not to give a child too much of allowance or too young, because he just might spend it on junk and hold it back, say, I'll give it to you later, another time when you really need something. So I don't think it needs much more explanation. You can expand upon it greatly. And then there's mercy. And as I just saw described recently, mercy is really dependent on a situation. When a person seems to be in need, he may tell you of it or you may recognize it. And you're not even sure, like, if he needs, or it's you, it has to be you to be helped to help him, or if what's he going to spend the money on? But you see, he's in need, so you bypass your actual feelings, that rush of what you want to do or not do, and you give it to help the person. That's more in the line of mercy. So it's different than kindness. So getting back to dealing with the patients, if you recognize, again, with what healthcare is seen, but healthcare is not the only, way to be good to people by any means. And so if you're in a situation where you see a person in need, you recognize it, and you determine that you know what to do without closing any doors, is help them. And it said that that type of help actually develops a bond between people. Kindness doesn't necessarily. It could be the opposite. Some people don't want the kindness and they feel threatened or embarrassed that they have to be given. The person with the mercy, on the other hand, they see you're looking out for them and you're going out of your way for what they actually need. This could develop a bond. And again, it's not going to make you, sit at the same tables, go to the same movies, but we're talking about, more of a spiritual bonding and physical to a certain degree. I mean, life situation. So I'm going to tell you about a few things aside from the kosher situation you may see. First of all, is the Jewish Sabbath, and I'm not going into the details of the law, but the Jewish Sabbath is a mitzvah, it's a deed that's required of Jews, and it's not required of the Noahides. As a matter of fact, if the Noahides try to keep the Sabbath as saying, I'm keeping the Sabbath, that they're actually going against the law of God. You decide this is a sign between the Jews and myself. If a person wants to rest, pick a day of rest. It could be any day of the week, or be with the family, or do something that's good for the community. That's great. Nothing's stopping it. But you can't say I'm keeping the mitzvah of the requirement, God's requirements for the Sabbath. But here, with a Jew, is under command to keep the Sabbath, and it's a very, very intense mitzvah with a lot of specifications, and some are not bendable. Some are in a way, and how they are and how they aren't, we'll get to it another time. So know that the Jewish day begins in the evening or at night. There's two views. What that means is the sundown, or does it mean when you can see it's dark when you can see, you say, three medium-sized stars in the, say, a normal sky. I don't know the big cities, but reflects very much in city lights. So that's the beginning of a Jewish day. So you may see Jews scramble to go to work, leave work, wherever the work may be, a couple hours before nightfall, and you're used to the day starting at either sunrise or first light or maybe midnight. But for the Jews, that Sabbath start is in the evening, and it's very strict not to violate the Sabbath by starting at late. So if you can help a Jew get out of work on time, or you see a situation coming up and make him aware of the implications and it maybe delay him, this is a great service. Doesn't seem like much to you, but and if a person has we had you comes up with a holiday, sometimes our calendars, not many times, our calendars don't mix day to day, month, time of the situation in the month, and so the Sabbath is pretty clear, the seventh day of the week, on the Friday night into Saturday. And so if a person with a holiday may come up, say, I forgot, I have a holiday, I need to be off. And some of the holidays are just as strict as the Sabbath, except for maybe one or two items, but on the whole, for not working, not traveling, not using, sharing use of the power equipment. So if you can be understanding that if you're making a schedule, or you hear of something, maybe ask them, you need to make a schedule out on this. And so this again would be helpful. Um, Again, with eating, if a Jew decides he wants to eat someplace separate by himself, um, no, it's not that he's rejecting anybody and he doesn't, he's antisocial. It's just sometimes with the Sabbath, with the kosher preparation of food, items on the table, possible mix up, and maybe too many questions on a short lunch break, that he may elect to want to, or he or she may elect to eat by themselves or with their Jewish friends. So one shouldn't be insulted by that. It's kind of more of a necessity for them rather than a rejection for you. Again, with the greetings, men with men and women, if you don't initiate shaking hands, was uh, women and women could shake hands, but men and women, don't shake hands um, on the whole. And even in some Hasidic groups, especially, um, it's it's not considered like really a greeting. Um, it's enough that we recognize each other and speak to each other. And the handshake, um, I'm not saying this is true, but I heard in the olden days that people used to carry their weapon in the right hand. So therefore, when they put out an empty right hand, it indicated that they were a safe number, in a matter of speaking. So handshaking is not necessarily a universal greeting among Jews. And you didn't do anything wrong if you did, but especially with between the genders, and if this person holds your hand back, again, it's not to you, it's because of our culture and our laws, and especially intermingling between men and women, and things that can lead from there. Regarding that, we're in the book of Leviticus, and I don't know how the translation is called, after the death of the sons of Aaron, and the Kadoshim, which is holy. You're doing a double portion this week, and it deals with the forbidden relationships. Um, on the whole, one can, for Noahide, abide by those and know that that's what's forbidden for them. It's interesting to note, and this is a kind of a interesting facet of Jewish learning, that one can see that it says not to have a relationship with one's daughter's child, granddaughter, not with stepsister, not with a daughter-in-law, but it doesn't say not with your daughter. So this is not a release from that, because common sense, although sometimes common sense is not always usable, but it doesn't allow that relationship. And so that there are tools in Torah learning which are like formulas that say if one thing is applicable in one case, and then another thing is applicable in another case, similar. So therefore, if it doesn't mention the daughter, if it mentions a granddaughter, a stepdaughter, niece, and so on, and daughter-in-law, you can be sure it includes the daughter. Why Hashem chose to do it that way at that point, it's beyond my knowledge. I'm sure people who do have information on that. So anyway, I just want to make the point that this is the location for the forbidden relationships, and includes many facets of that, different situations. And I recommend you take a look at it. I mean, it's in your some of the Noahide books already, no question, because it's one of the 7 laws. So I was just mentioning intermingling, and again, we put fences around that because human nature is very strong when it comes to this item. And one thing can lead to another very easily, you believe. That's why we take safeguards. And if you get used to it, actually, that women have some situations where they have, what we call a mechitza, sort of a fence between the men and women at a wedding. And I heard a Jewish woman saying it was like it was such a good mechitza, like we were really private and we could dance and we just like hold each other, as friends, and feel very comfortable with nobody looking in at us. I remember I was in a fraternity in my earlier days when I wasn't religious, and it was mixed seating at a dinner, and it was kind of a formal dinner, and like there was a girl sitting across from me, someone else's date, and because my date was beside me, I had a date that time, but um, it was very uncomfortable. How you watch everything you do and all your mannerisms of and eating etiquette, which is not bad. But then I remember later when I came into situations where it was all men eating in the same room, it was much more comfortable. So I'm not trying to convince you that our ways are better, but it's not always strict and restrictive and burdensome. Sometimes we might find it easier. Okay, going forward, um, prayer. We pray at least 3 times a day, ideally. And there's actually a morning prayer before the only getting out of bed prayer or uh, pre-morning prayer, and there's a night prayer. So it could be actually 5 times. And so if a Jew is praying and you come in the room, a couple of things could happen. He could look up and speak to you because there are certain areas or situations, locations in the prayer where he can't speak to someone. And there are other occasions where he can't, but you can signal to each other. You can speak to him. Okay. He may be able to speak back, but he may indicate, may write. So don't be surprised with that. And there are times when they can't acknowledge you at all, that they are a certain prayer, a certain part of prayers where we believe that we're right in the middle, right in front of God and God's presence. And to conduct ourselves that way, whether we have that feeling or not, but this prayer is designed for us to have that relationship with God. And therefore, you may not get any response at all. Again, don't be offended. Wait a little bit. Of course, if God forbid, a life-depending emergency, person has to get out of the room because of a fire. Preservation of life as it carries a lot of weight. Jews overriding some laws. So the prayers, and you don't pray in the bathroom. Say the person's looking in a place with not a lot of people, don't show them the bathroom, maybe a storage closet or just a empty space area. And so the prayers. Another thing I mentioned last time is hand washing. That we wash our hands spiritually as well as physically. Spiritual uncleanliness and physical uncleanliness. And both are very important. I think if you have any choice, you're going to be clean physically, but ideally we'll go out of our way to find water outside of, say, the bathroom or some other soiled place, or after touching something which is not nice, to in washing from that, to have that spiritual washing. Sometimes it's from a cup. So if a person doesn't have a cup, sometimes you'll see a cup with handles, either in the lunchroom at work or maybe in the bathroom of the hospital. So the person has access to it and he knows where it is, or at the bedside. It has a very specific purpose. And if not, the person can indicate he'd like to have a cup, and you can provide him with a nice sized cup that holds certain, but whatever you can give is fine. But in a larger cup, disposable, that would be very helpful. So going forward from that into prayers or going sideways, you may see a couple of items, and this would normally be during the morning prayer. The one is the shawl, prayer shawl, the black and white things. It could be different colors, but its purpose is the beautification of the fringes at the end. You will see in the biblical text that a Jew wears a four-cornered garment that should have fringes on each corner. and those fringes are made a special way. It's materials that are specific. And so when he's in the middle of putting this on, again, he makes a blessing and he'll put it on, say a couple of passages. He won't be talking, but it's brief. But once that goes on, the prayers start to get a little more intense. And then you have this item called tefillin. I have to see if that shows up in this picture. That's the straps around the arm. And like you see boxes on the head and hand. I don't know if it shows up that well. You see the box on the head, behind the head, and there's a box on the arm, and there's a strap wrapped around their arms. People think maybe it's a tourniquet, or God forbid somebody's shooting up with drugs in a way, but something to be aware of. Here, it's a good picture. And during that time, many people won't talk when they have those on, or but maybe against. Depends where they are in the prayer, or so know those items and don't get nervous. And they, so the tzitzis is a biblical. It says you have the fringes on the four corners, and try to keep it with the person as much as possible. If he tells you in the situation where it's better not to put it on, some people I've seen take it to surgery, some people don't. But on the whole, and you might say, well, why do you have to wear a four-cornered garment? If you don't wear a four-cornered garment, you need it. And interesting question, but we do it partially to beautify and to show the importance. Again, a mitzvah commandment of God is not to be looked at as a burden. It could be burdensome at times, the situation, but it's for our our betterment and our relationship with God and our spiritual makeup. So if you can wear this four-cornered garment, we have one that it just fits under the shirt, and you'll see it hanging down without that big shawl, but it's still part of a four-cornered garment. So if we have a chance to do mitzvahs, um, and it's for betterment, so we do. So that's you may say, well, it may not be necessary. A very good example of that is that whenever God told Moses to do a mitzvah, and even one that seemed inconsequential to naked eye, Moses jumped on it to do it. There were mitzvahs that had to be done for the land of Israel once they went into the land of Israel. And Moses knew by that time he was not going to go in. Another story why that happened. But nevertheless, there was one mitzvah, which was cities of refuge, where some could be made in the land they were already in, on I guess the west side of the Jordan, and others would for the east side of the Jordan, and other for when they went into the land of Israel would be on the west side of the Jordan. So Moses could have just waited and say, well, let's wait till they're all in, and you guys can handle it. He did the ones that where he was located at that time to show that whatever he could be involved with for God's commandments, he would grab the opportunity to do it. Okay, so with this in mind, I just wanted to give you this kind of introduction. We can go on and do some more, and I hope you have a great weekend. You have good news all around the world, your home, and your family, and we should have Mashiach now, the revelation of God, godliness in this world, and you are a part of making that happen. God bless you.